Recently, I listened to an episode of the podcast Dimes y Billetes, hosted by Maurice Deek, where he talks about Venezuela. And I want to start by making something clear. His analysis is brilliant. It's not propaganda, it's not shouting, it's not cheap ideology. It's a cold, economic, real reflection. And to me, that's incredibly valuable. This episode inspired me because when someone speaks with data, with facts, and with a clear mind, it forces you to think and to look inside yourself. From behind a desk, I'm speaking from Cuba, from having lived in a system that was sold as social justice, equality, and dignity, but ended up being about control, misery, and fear. And listening to that episode, I realized something that for me is no longer ideology, it's experience. Communism isn't a failed theory, it's a cancer. A cancer that disguises itself as hope but destroys everything it touches. I'm not creating this space to spread hate, I do it to teach, to educate, so that those who listen to me don't have to learn the hard way like so many of us did. Because when a system eliminates property, initiative, merit, and freedom, it doesn't get rid of poverty, it spreads it around. And that's not just my opinion, the numbers, history, and millions of shattered lives say it too. Maybe you don't live in Cuba, maybe you don't live in Venezuela, but if today you can choose start a business, make mistakes, grow, and try again, that's not a coincidence, that's freedom. And my intention with this space is simple. For us to think, to question, to stop romanticizing systems that destroy entire countries. So today, I start from an economic reflection to arrive at a human one. Because when you understand how money, power, and control work, you understand why some systems never fail. Because they're designed for the people to lose.
Economies define power relationships. For much of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st, the United States was Venezuela's main energy partner. For a long time, it imported what it wanted, building up tension, crisis, and pain. For some, this moment represents the beginning of the end of a regime. For others, it's just another move in a much bigger and more complex conflict.
Now I want to go a step further. I don't just want to say how I feel, but also show with numbers and facts what has happened when communism is imposed. Venezuela is a country that has more oil than many developed countries, but it hasn't been able to use that wealth to prosper. The Venezuelan economy has seriously collapsed. The gross domestic product has fallen by around 80% in less than a decade under socialist economic policies and state control. Oil production, which has historically accounted for more than 90% of exports, has suffered from years of lack of investment and mismanagement. Just imagine a country with so much oil, rich in resources, and it ends up with such a weak economy that its GDP, it has literally been reduced to a fraction of what it once was. These aren't just numbers, these are people. By the late 2010s, the standard of living in Venezuela had dropped by about 74% between 2013 and 2023, one of the largest declines ever recorded in peacetime. Venezuela went from being a middle-income country with relatively strong health and education systems to a humanitarian crisis, where medicine, food, and basic services are lacking. That means millions of Venezuelans now live in much harsher conditions. And the saddest part is, it wasn't necessary. A communist-style economy that controls prices, money, and production ends up causing what's called hyperinflation. It's like inflation that's completely out of control. Venezuela experienced hyperinflation in recent years, with prices rising by thousands of % annually due to excessive money printing and a lack of real production. The currency loses value while prices skyrocket. That means your salary is worth less every day, and a lot of people end up unable to buy even the most basic things. And here comes a crucial point, especially for those familiar with the Cuban case. Cuba and Venezuela were closely allied for years. Venezuela sent cheap oil in exchange for doctors and political support. When the Venezuelan economy started to collapse, that support decreased, and that, in turn, affected the Cuban economy. I'm not mentioning this to criticize anyone, I'm saying it to educate. A system where the state controls everything, Everything, including the economy, production, and even the most basic decisions, ends up eliminating real incentives to produce, to start businesses, and to grow, wasting resources. People become desperate, and many end up emigrating. No one wakes up in the morning thinking about how to produce more if the system punishes those who try with bureaucracy, corruption, and penalties. I'm speaking from Cuba. I lived under a system that promised equality, social justice, and well-being. And I ended up seeing scarcity, emigration, and a lack of opportunities. To educate is not to hate. To educate is to show realities with facts, numbers, and intellectual honesty. So, if you were able to listen to the episode of Dimes y Billetes, Reflecting on Venezuela by Maurice Deek, this is an invitation to think beyond politics, beyond rhetoric, and get to the heart of what directly affects people's lives: freedom, production, and the common good. Because if we learn from the mistakes of other countries, we can protect our family, our community, and our future. Communism doesn't fail because of bad people. It fails because the system. It's designed to fail. It doesn't reward those who work harder. It doesn't protect entrepreneurs. It doesn't reward those who produce. It rewards those who obey. And I'm not saying this to impose an idea. I'm saying it so we can think about it. Because when you look at Cuba, when you see Venezuela, when you see the numbers, the emigration, the poverty, you understand that it's not a cultural problem. It's a problem with the system. And that's why this space exists, to educate so that we don't romanticize systems that destroy entire countries. Because economic freedom isn't a luxury, it's the foundation of human dignity.